Okay, hello and welcome to the Michael Mama Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you live today from Mount Soma in the mountains of Western North Carolina, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple. And, when I do my podcast, for years I gave classes, and generally speaking, I'd give 1 hour lectures from time to time, but generally speaking, I'd give 3-day classes. Sometimes I'd give big retreats that lasted a week or whatever, but most commonly 3-day classes. And the way I would do those classes pretty much is I just walk in and sit down and start talking about whatever was on my mind. I mean, the point being there that not that I was just rambling about this or that, but the point being that anything you talk about connects to the knowledge. I don't care if you're talking about how to weave a basket or play tennis or physics or spirituality, because there's a vessel, and I call that vessel, in fact, that vessel that holds everything, that unifies everything, that's spirituality. And so we could start anywhere, and all the knowledge would just come out, And in fact, by approaching it from just whatever angle, it deepens the insight, it deepens the understanding. Otherwise, we end up with kind of like simplistic models that don't really embrace the totality of the topic, of spirituality. Now, today's topic, the title is From Oblivion to Utopia. The process, what's next? Okay, we've talked about how there's a golden age coming and everything's going to be great. And I believe that's true. But I think we do well here to look at the here and now, because everything is so nutty right now. I mean, anywhere you look, any topic that comes up, you've got passionate perspectives in opposite directions and so much craziness. And somebody asked me what I thought about something. I was just on the phone with them. And so no kidding, for like 1 or 2 seconds, I just paused to think about what I wanted to say. That's all it took. Right away, they were really angry and they wouldn't let it go. Your pause tells me that this is what you think and what you feel. And I don't even know if I can have you as a friend anymore, that kind of a thing. So the passions are running wild. And like I say in the blog introducing this podcast, it's like everybody, all the world views. I don't care if you're talking about the border or if you're talking about politics, if you're talking about the virus, if you're talking about education versus indoctrination, racism, politics, religion. It's like there are all these kites that are just without tails, just spinning. And it's just pandemonium everywhere. And you just got to ask yourself, where's the wisdom? What happened? And what's going on with this world? And how in the world are we going to get from this pandemonium, this craziness of conflicts and passionate perspectives in all different directions? How are we going to get from that to a golden age? What's going on, and so I thought what we'd do today is I just want to use spirituality as an example of that whole process. And if you can generalize then these principles to everything that we just talked about, not just religion and spirituality, but education, politics, you name it. If you can generalize that approach, then I think you'll give a good feeling for, how we're going to, well, if I can say it this way, get out of this mess that we seem to find ourselves in, because where we're going to, Sat Yuga, the fullness of the golden age, we all have our idealized notions, I think, about what that's going to look like and what the world's going to be like. And we're all tend to be pretty passionate about our convictions in that regard as well. But really, what that's going to be like is unimaginable. Why? Because we have our identities, our paradigm, our identities, our notions. And it's not about that, you know. It's not about the world conforming to what we think it should look like so much as us conforming to what? To nature, to Mother Nature, not our notions of nature, not our notions of what's natural, but what is in fact natural. What is in fact, and what do we mean by natural? We mean in harmony with the underlying basis of existence. That source of infinite intelligence, infinite harmony, that oneness, call it the unified field, call it God, call it whatever you want. I don't care what you call it. Some would call it Shiva, some would call it Vishnu, some would call it Christ. But again, it's the understanding that matters. But what that's going to look like, we can't even imagine. Even the notion of like freedom, well, we'll all be free. Well, yeah, I agree with that. Can you imagine that? Living a level of life where everybody's infinitely free. But what does that even mean? You know, we have our notions of what freedom means. But what does freedom really mean? Freedom means awakening to that place where what? Is it your will? Or is it conformity to God's will? Well, what it is, freedom, real freedom with a capital freedom, you know, means coming from a place where your will and God's will are one. But now, what does that even look like? Well, that means we'll all be doing the same thing? No, because God's will, and we're talking about nature here, the nature of life is that different individuals living in harmony with nature still flow in different directions. It's like waves on the ocean. The waves are still going to crash against the rocks on the seashore, and they're going to be going in opposite directions. But they'll all be infinitely free. But it's not chaos. It's not no holds barred, anything goes, because all the different waves, though maybe going in different directions, are all rooted in the same one thing. And what is that going to look like in an enlightened age? It's anybody's guess. You know, we can't really tell from here. Creativity. What does it mean to be creative? What does it mean to be creative? Real creativity doesn't come from getting good at conforming to a paradigm. Oh, you can do that and you can really accomplish things. Classical physics is a paradigm, and we follow that paradigm and we build, you know, cars and everything else. But real creativity is where we go beyond that particular paradigm, any particular paradigm, and find the truth of that which lies beyond our current paradigm identities from within us, and we function from that level. And in an enlightened state, in a state where we're all going to be living in the age of full grandeur of the golden age, Sat Yuga, every moment is a creative moment. We're not slaves to a perspective. We're not indoctrinated into a notion, but we're functioning spontaneously in harmony with nature all the time, you know? But if we take a look at spirituality, I think we can see that it's not really as simplistic as sometimes it's made out to be. You know, I think it's interesting when you think about it. Look at all the history of saints, really. Jesus, Krishna. In fact, every avatar in the Vedic tradition, and we talked about this earlier in Darwin's theory of evolution and how it parallels to the Vedic thing. Vishnu is a fish, Vishnu is a tortoise, you know, like that. every one of those incarnations of an avatar, which is what? An embodiment of that underlying basis in the physical. An avatar, God, if you will, in physical form, if you will. Every one of those ultimately meets with a nemesis. And that's interesting. And you might say, well, why? Why? How could that be? And it's just paradigm identity. You know, if you might think, you know, if our notions of Christ were consistent with what Christ really was, how in the world did they find guys to nail him to a cross? Well, it's because it's not living a life of divinity isn't consistent with what our paradigm identity might say it's like. In fact, if we were to meet somebody like that, Christ, Krishna, whatever, you won't necessarily even recognize it, particularly if you really have notions of, oh, you're supposed to be like this, you're supposed to be like that. And, you know, if Jesus was standing before us, this is what he'd be like. It just doesn't work that way, you know. You know, one principle, and actually Abraham Lincoln kind of alluded to this in a nice way. During the Civil War, somebody said to Lincoln, well, we're going to win the war because God's on our side. And Lincoln's, you know, classic response was, well, I'm more concerned about being on God's side than I'm about God being on our side. And there's a nice analogy I like to use about Ganesh. You know, Lord Ganesh is known as the principle of the unified field that removes obstacles. And so oftentimes people pray to that particular aspect of divinity to have obstacles to our desires removed. But see, Lord Ganesh is also the Lord of categories. And how do those two things come together? Well, a category is kind of like a channel. You can view it as a particular category or path of life. And yes, Lord Ganesh removes obstacles, but not if the category you're following is inconsistent with nature, with Mother Nature, with your own nature. So Lord Ganesh would remove categories by helping you, remove obstacles by helping you live your life in alignment with a particular category, a particular nature, a particular quality that's inherent to your own nature that supports your life and helps it move forward. But oftentimes that's not how it's approached, is it? It's like we have our desires, we have our wants, and so we pray to God, you know, give us this, or can we have this, and it's not really the way it works, you know, particularly if we're too indoctrinated into a perspective of how we think things are supposed to be. Another problem with spirituality, it's like we're talking about this golden lingo, or having this solid gold lingo. We're doing pretty well, by the way, including the money that's already come in and the commitments that have been made. We're about halfway there already, and we just started, you know. So I think we'll get the funds together here, hopefully soon, you know, and then we'll have the gold linga made, and then start employing that technology to bring prosperity to all the participants and to Mount Soma, you know, and through all of us and through Mount Soma, they'll radiate that value to the world, you know. But the thing is, here's the thing. We're accustomed to kind of instant gratification kind of a world. You know, you throw a light switch, you expect the light to go on right then. You turn the key on your car, you expect the ignition to start. And so the thing is that there's a time lag in nature. And it's a time lag between cause and effect. You know, karma has a time lag. I don't mean to get too abstract, but if there wasn't a time lag there, this universe wouldn't exist. because for every action, there'd be an immediate reaction and all would just neutralize and we'd be back to no thingness. So in a sense, that time lag of karma is responsible for relativity, this world. But we're not used to that. We have a hard time with it. So, if we pray or if we have yajnas performed, ceremonies performed, doing the ceremonies, for example, with the gold linga and stuff. Somebody even said to me just recently, well, I've been having these pujas done for several years and I don't really see any immediate results. Well, it doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't work that way. See, you have the depth of the ocean, that transcendental value, and that's the level that these technologies are done on, the deepest level of existence, which is the most powerful level of existence. But it's like the integration, the coordination between what's going on at the depth and what's going on in the surface of life. There can be a time lag there. So, we might look at it and say, just another classic example, why is somebody who's selling drugs to children seem to be living a life of abundance and prosperity? And where you have these other good people and they just seem to be suffering. Well, the karma will come back and it will return, but it's not this light switch kind of a phenomenon, you see? So when we do these things, we need to understand that it's a process, it takes time, and what we're doing here is working on the most fundamental, the most important level of life. The most fundamental level of life is the most important level of life. And, it's kind of funny that we almost have to say that, at least in this other sense. Now, another thing about spirituality is this whole notion of escapism. I think one thing I've seen is that, people want to go to church on Sunday or whatever, just to kind of escape the trials and tribulations of everyday life. It's more of an avoidance. I think in India, they talk about if you're running from the house into the backyard, are you running out of the house or are you running into the garden? And I think a lot of times with respect to spirituality, we just want to vent, we want out. We want to get out of all the trials and tribulations. So what that can kind of lead to, not across the board, but it is common, and with some groups, I think it's more common with others, that they're really looking for an emotional catharsis. They're looking for some sort of vent, some sort of emotional indulgence even. And it becomes sort of a form of denial, But spirituality isn't that way. Spirituality is about integration. It's not about escapism. Spirituality is about finding the depth within your own being. It's not like God is out there. God is out there, but that's not really the real path to spirituality. Is, oh God, help me, or oh God, or oh I feel God, or oh I see God, or oh it's also beautiful. So much as it's finding the wisdom and that depth anchored in the depth of our being and functioning from that place. It's a grounded state. A lot of times we want to go to God like that, and there is some truth to that. But perhaps even more importantly, it's about finding it inside. And it doesn't look like what oftentimes we go to church or go to the temple or whatever in hopes of what it will look like. It's a maturity. It's an integration. It's a finding wisdom within your own self. Now keep in mind, we're talking about spirituality here, but we can apply it to all sorts of things, and take some thought, but it can be applied to education. It can be applied to politics. It can be applied to anything. Where do we find the wisdom? And we're addicted to looking outside of ourselves, be it for God or be it for a political viewpoint to adhere to, or a conviction about education or racism, for example. racism too, it's so confused, what I like to say about that is that racism is cultural integrity gone insane. I mean, the point being, and you hear people talk about, okay, what is it like? What is it? White power or whatever it is, or black power, or and it becomes a polarizing thing, and it becomes a racist kind of a thing. Whereas if we just go a little deeper and feel into just the inner wisdom of the thing, there's a certain value to the integrity of a culture. And it's not a bad thing. And it's not that, oh, well, blacks should have nothing to do with whites because cultural integrity. No, that's racism. But there is something to be said about the notion that birds of a feather flock together. And so, yes, we want, I think another expression like black pride. Yeah, for sure. But not to the extent where it becomes militant, but rather that it has integrity. It has dignity. It has, as a culture is more and more, there's a level of refinement to the whole thing. And I don't care if you're talking about whites, blacks, Chinese, whatever, But if you talk that way, people too often jump to the idea that, oh, the person's a racist. No, that's not racism. That's integrity. That's decency. China has its culture. We honor that. We respect that. But if it gets to the point of hatred, be it that some Chinese hate whites or that some whites hate Chinese, that's not good. That's called racism. You see? And so we need to really embrace the distinction. Cultures are there to culture the mentality and the souls of the people. And trying to obliterate it, trying to stamp it out, it's foolish. It's foolish. Another thing about, and this is true more of some cultures than others, but with respect to spirituality, we need to understand, see, I think the great thing about the Vedic tradition is that they have the Veda. What is the Veda? The Veda are the subtle impulses, the language of nature that dwells at the underlying basis of all existence. And what really is unique about the Vedic tradition is that there are these rishis, these seers, that in ancient times, when they touched into that level and allowed those impulses to well up through their physiology and out their vocal cords, it was memorized, it was written down, it was passed on, even before writing, it was passed on through oral tradition from pundit to pundit. So they have that. Now, we don't want to get too simplistic about it, because in all parts of the world, there is or was at some time Vedic cognition. I remember once there was a guy who was playing a recording to a saint of these Finnish chants, these ancient chants from Finland that some people have remembered and memorized and passed on from generation to generation. And when the saint heard it, he said, "That's the Veda." And the person said, "Oh, no, these are recordings from Finland." And he said, "That's the Veda." And that's true of the American Indians. I think they had it at one point in time. But what happens is when that gets lost, then what's being taught as spirituality is like an echo of what it used to be. That's one thing that concerns me about Christianity is Christ didn't write down anything, or if he did, we don't have it. And I don't think much was written down about him for 100 years, 200 years. I don't know how long it was. A long time. And I know just from my own experience, somebody hears a lecture and then they walk out and repeat what the lecturer just said, and it's not what the lecturer just said, particularly if you're speaking of something as subtle as spiritual knowledge. So there we have a real dilemma because Christians, rightfully so, look to Christ as that embodiment of that which dwells at the underlying basis of all existence. It dwells within their own soul. It's that thing that's so precious that dwells within them. And so we have to be careful, because if we talk about, if you hear what I just said, it can sound like I'm being judgmental of the depth of a Christian soul, and that's not it at all. But what I'm talking about here is there has to be a refinement of the understanding. Like, just for example, you hear things on the, like Sunday TV or commercials where somebody comes on and is, talking about Christianity. Oh, Jesus loves you. Well, what does that mean? Jesus loves you. I mean, on some level, okay, we can feel it or whatever, but what does it mean? I mean, where's Jesus, and what does it mean that he loves us, And that's the big problem with religion today, is because there's so many things like that, and you'll hear them, all these different expressions. Next time you hear a Christian expression like that, ask yourself what it really means. And then you can take this knowledge of the unified field and understand it better in that way. And then it makes sense, because, a lot of people these days, they hear, oh, Jesus loves you. And they're like, what does that mean? That doesn't make any sense. And so what happens is they throw out the baby with the bathwater and end up rejecting religion and spirituality altogether. And you see that not just in Christianity, you see it in the Vedic tradition. I was talking the other day about a kid that I saw standing outside the temple. I could tell this, maybe I was projecting, but it looked to me like wasn't into it, didn't make any sense to him. His parents from India were in the temple worshiping some guy with the head of an elephant, and stuff like that, and he just couldn't buy it. So it does make sense, but we have to make sense of these things, because otherwise we've cast it away. And please, let's go back. Education, cultural integrity, all these different principles. We need to view education, religion, politics from a deeper place inside, as opposed to these waves of karma. How did Dylan put it? Blown in the wind. It's like our mentalities are blown in the winds of karma. And we need to take a step back and look at our, whatever they are, political convictions, educational convictions, convictions even about the virus. Okay, the virus. My goodness. I'll tell you the problem there. And I don't mean to be bashing different groups, but there's a certain relationship people have with physicians that hopefully, and I think will mature as a result of what we've experienced with respect to the physicians and the doctors who are dealing with the virus, I mean, one day it's wear a mask, it's another day it don't wear a mask, and people are, well, that's what the science says, and we do what the science says, but then it jerks us in the other direction. And pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, pro-hydroxychloroquine, anti-hydroxychloroquine, but it's all these physicians that are arguing and debating and then changing their mind over time. And it's not really critical of the physician so much as it's critical of people put too much emphasis on what a particular physician might say without really we abandon our rationality. We abandon our discernment. Oh, the doctor said to do this, we need to have a mature relationship with that. Our relationship with it needs to mature. Our relationship with everything in that regard, it needs to mature. And what is that maturation process? We're talking about wisdom, cultivating wisdom. I mean, where does wisdom come from? The depth of your being, cultivating the depth of your soul. What is that? That's real spiritual growth. You find God deep inside. Looking out that way too much, it doesn't work. There was this one guy who came here. He was a Canadian, and he dressed up, like a guru and considered himself a guru. And I met him. I sat down with him for 30 seconds. That was enough for me. And I said, "Where are you from?" He went, "The universe," like that. And I said, "Where do you live?" And he went, "Earth." I'm sorry, spirituality isn't about being out there. Spirituality is about maturity. Spirituality doesn't particularly look like somebody expanded and incredibly wow, they're just more normal. They're not more weird, It's an internal state. It's not an external appearance. And so we need to become discerning even about our spiritual teachers. Just because somebody's all floaty and talks sweetly and all this stuff, and then, okay, there we have our spiritual teacher. No, they might be conforming to your idealized notion of detachment and escapism, what you would like to think spirituality is based on your identity, but it's not it. It's not it. Spirituality is not just emotionalism. Spirituality is rationality integrated with our emotions. In fact, even with our deeper feelings, our fine feelings. And it's a process of cultivating our being as a human being. It's a multivariable equation. Our growth is a multivariable equation. You see, we've been trained, though, to isolate variables, to just take one variable and this has that and this has that. But spirituality is just like all these different fields. It's all encompassing, just like with science. Science, because these principles don't just apply to spirituality, they apply to everything. Science is multifaceted, though our approach to it can be to try to limit one variable. That's where we got in trouble with the virus. That's another place we got in trouble with the virus, is maybe we were saying, yeah, let's just shut everything down in perpetuity and nobody's exposed to anything, and so nobody gets the virus, but there are other variables involved. Of course, now there are arguments against shutting down because now you're confined and breathing the same air with other people all day long in a building if you're all in the same building apartment. So you're just spreading the virus more. But there's also the idea that even if shutting down did work in the viral sense, look at the impact it's having on the lives of people, from depression, suicide, alcoholism, the anguish and stress of no money coming in, and so everything in life is a multivariable equation. And the way we navigate those waters isn't through limiting all the different variables and just considering one variable, but to rest in the wisdom of our being. See, deep inside, it's like a cosmic computer where when we function in harmony with nature, nature spontaneously acts in a manner that is in accord with all the laws of nature, our own nature. You see, that's what common sense. We sense into that which is common to all things. And what's an even more refined level than common sense, we call it wisdom. So what's going to happen here is we're going to look at all of the things. I mean, what was that list that I started with in the beginning? I'm going to scroll right back up to it. Education, the borders, viruses, indoctrination, racism, politics, religion. What's going to happen is we're going to look at what's going on in the world, all the conflicts, all of the anger, all of the passions in all different directions. You're bad, we're right, you're wrong, on and on. And sooner or later, and I think we're on the verge, we're going to say, we have had enough. This is enough. This is madness. And where are we going to go? we're going to just let go of the surface and rest into our common sense, rest into our depth, rest into our wisdom, and start navigating the waters of life in that manner. And that's what's going to bring about the golden age. That, you see, is how the chaos of this phase transition is, in fact, going to be the very impetus that propels us into a golden age, an age of wisdom. You see? I think that's about all I got, Scotty. Anything you wanted to add? Or
No, I think it was really well said.
Okay. Oh, good. Good. Appreciate it. Adrian, by the way, has been off for a couple of weeks. She'll be back next week, so it'll be good to have her back. And if you're interested, I think it's a great opportunity. I mean, it's amazing to me that what Panditji is doing with this golden linga when we have it. It's going to be in perpetuity. He's going to do this, and you're going to get blessings from it. And it's a Vedic technology. You see, it's not just an emotional thing. There's a technology to it. And we'll be getting benefits from that in perpetuity. So I would encourage you to participate. You can go to, if you go to the blog about the golden link at michaelmamas.net, I'll show you a place where you can click and it goes to the donation page, and then you just click. It's very simple. Or you can go to the temple website, srisameshwara.org. And right at the top there, you'll see the opportunity where you can read about the golden linga and participate in that. I encourage you to do it. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, And some people have asked, well, would a bigger linga be better? No, and it's interesting because when these questions come up, I have my answers in my mind, but I always go and bounce off of Panditji at the same time. And it's really interesting. These pundits are incredibly knowledgeable, You ask him a question, and what he does first is he starts rattling off a verse from the Veda about it. And then he translates the verse. And with respect to the size of the linga, it doesn't matter. And then, let's see, there was another question I asked. Oh, then somebody asked, well, if I do 2 donations instead of 1, 2 times 108 instead of just 108, or 10 times or whatever, do I get more benefit? To me, it's like, well, it seems like, yeah, but I asked. And again, what does he do? He just rattles off part of the Veda, and it's direct proportion. So the more you get involved, the more the benefits you'll get from it. But it's up to you. Again, it's a multivariable equation. You got to consider your economic position. You got to consider the things you need to do with the money and your situation, and then you make your own decision. But I'd encourage you to just at least do $108, and then you're connected to it. You're part of it. You're participating in it in perpetuity. And again, all the money goes directly into the purchase of the linga. There's not like we're not taking any percentage or anything. Even Panditji is not charging anything more to do these ceremonies. He's just doing it as part of what he's going to be doing for the temple. All right, I guess that's it for now. And look forward to talking to you again next week. Thanks for listening.